Jaswinder, let me unmute you. There you go.
Oh, thank you very much. I must
You have
remember
these
to
little
do that.
time changes that confuse people, you know?
Yes, I didn't expect you to be on in the UK. So how have they done that? How do the computers relay you through Europe?
Sorry, our connection, my connection is very bad, so I cannot hear you very well. There's Doug. Doug is materializing. Doug, I hope you don't take this the wrong way, but you're overexposed. And I just unmuted you.
It's okay. The field is strong.
I got to tell you, my connection looks really bad today, so I'm making everybody co-host in case anybody can also record. There you go. Now you're materialized. There's Ms. Tammy.
Hello, Doug.
Jaswinder, what kind of motorcycle is that in that picture?
It's a BSA 350 manufactured in India from the old BSA machinery, which was sold, hello Tammy, which was sold to India decades ago. And they produced several variants.
Wow, it's very cool. Not that I would ever want to own a British motorcycle, but I love them. The aesthetics can't be beat.
You know, there's a big story connected to the old machinery and the lack of jobs in the Western world presently. Hello, Anna.
Yeah.
So we're having a pre-meeting warm-up again, are we?
I don't know.
We can do that. Do we want to do a check-in? Sam, you're really dark for the first time in ever. Like normally you're baked.
Because you were overexposed, so I went underexposed. Okay, let me get the other camera turned on. Hang on.
T-H-E-R-E.
No, how do you spell that?
There as
Did I hear that right? Somebody just asked how to spell Zan.
No. Who is that?
well, we've got Doug, Tammy, Sam, and Anna. Well, she doesn't want to talk. Last time she was quite happy, but today she's a bit shy. No, I've turned the sound off. You can come and have a look. The sound is off. And Dad was still there. T-H-E-R-E. T-H-E-R-E.
So should we start with a quick check-in? Who wants to go last? Okay. Anna, you want to kick us off?
Okay. It's been quite a nice day here in UK. The first sort of feeling of spring day that we've had. And I've been out in the garden digging. And I had a friend come over and help lift some heavy stones because there's a stone wall that has sort of collapsed and we're trying to rebuild it. it's just been fun. I love doing that. That's me.
How's your back holding up?
Oh, it's not my back, it's my hip. And when I do exercise like I did this morning, well, like I did yesterday, I went for a walk for about 2.5 hours. And yeah, it gets a bit sore. But I slept very well last night. And if I really start taking heavy painkillers, then I'll get worried. But at the moment, although I can feel it, it isn't, too intense. So I'm okay. Thank you.
Sam, you want to go while we've got you?
I probably got as much sleep last night as I've probably gotten in many days, probably over 7 hours. And yesterday, I did something I should have been doing much, 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 much longer. I was with my shovel, and I was out shoveling my dog's deposits in the backyard. So on the other hand, I was doing it because it was a great day. The weather was fabulous, and I was feeling pretty good. My daughter, Veronica, who's 14, I thought I'd share this, loves cooking. So she's actually cooked 2 out of the last 3 meals, and she's going to cook tonight. That's something I didn't expect, but it's wonderful. And then today, I'll be leaving after about 2 hours because she wants to go to brunch today. We haven't done that in a long time. So about 10 a.m. our time, about when she wakes up, I'll probably be getting ready to go to brunch. But feeling pretty good. Lots of things going on. Lots of conversation threads from Friday to Saturday today. So I'm looking forward to diving into all that. Bye for now. I mean, good for now. Done for now. Over for now.
I wanted to add something which is a bit weird, but I've discovered that I've got hives. I don't know whether anybody knows anything about hives, but it's sort of, if I keep itching, it's because I have this weird thing. I've had it a few days now. I've looked it up, and it's just sort of itchy bumps. It's not contagious. They don't know where it comes from. It's on my head, yeah. But it's also occasional bits around my body. And it's apparently pretty harmless, but it's itchy. They don't know how long it's going to last. What does that mean? Tammy just went.
I mean, that sucks.
It does, yeah. It's a bit weird.
If it's any consolation to you, Anna, I'm going through a similar patch currently, and I've been given some antihistamine tablets.
Right, yeah, antihistamine.
Yeah, and usually when I'm sitting here and I'm being pestered or not being pestered, it can start anywhere. It does itch, as you say. And the antihistamine tablets, apart from causing nausea, don't seem to help much. And then I had a long chat with the doctor, and very nice doctor. And she said, we don't really know how or what it is. We can only medicate you. And if it's not suitable, we'll change it for you. And since then, I stopped taking the medication, and it seems to be clearing. So that's about 3 months ago. But a couple of days ago, it just appears, and it seemed like a rash. And I even took pictures, and I showed her pictures, and she said, yes, but we don't know.
Well, that's interesting you said that it's 3 months ago, because I was sort of connecting it with this cold spell that we've had, which also brought winds from a very different direction. And also generally sort of affected me somehow as though it felt different. And so I was wondering whether it was to do with that the the stuff from Siberia or whatever it is. But anyway, big question mark. But thank you, Jaswinder.
No, you can't.
Over.
The microphone is very loud now because of
Jaswinder, do you want to do a check-in?
I was just about
Or does your granddaughter want to do a check-in?
Don't tell my name.
Don't tell my name. I'll do it later, thank you.
His name is just
Well, I'll go next, and then I guess, Tammy, you're up. For the first time in, I don't know, what, 5 months, 6 months, I missed a session yesterday. And that was very strange and disorienting. So until I go back and get a chance to screen it, the feeling was one of being unanchored. But other than that, I was looking forward to today, and I have a starting place that I'm very eager to sort of put up on the boards, and I'm complete.
Hi, Charles. Nice to see you.
Charles, we're doing quick check-ins, so if you want to jump in, because Tammy said she wanted to go last.
You're muted, Charles.
Thank you. Great. I just have the speaker view or whatever. I was looking for gallery view, so I don't know who else here, but hi, great to be here.
If you go up to the top right corner, you should be able to access the gallery view, speaker view thing.
Well, on my phone, it's sort of not doing that. Sorry.
You might need to swipe one way or the other. Yeah.
Oh, there you go. Thank you. Swiping was the trick. Hey, okay, cool. Now I know who's here. Anyway, I just noticed that because of the clock change, we were starting earlier. So I have been, kind of following a little bit, lurking for sure, but kind of increasingly aware incrementally of some of what you guys are up to, and just appreciate the dialogue and you as people. So that's kind of my, and I think if I understand, this is an unblocking today. Is that so I'm very keen on listening, and maybe I can contribute, but I'm in the midst of unblocking in a bunch of ways at the moment. So maybe I'll be very brief, leave it at that.
Sweet. I've just woken up, so I'm still kind of moving from that sleeping space into the awake world. Hi. Thanks for being part of my dreams. The dream bridge, the morning dream bridge. I'm good. I've been really quite busy and full on the last few days, which has felt amazing. And for those that know about my random financial, there was a hold on my bank account. It got lifted. So that was fantastic as well. And I just feel really like, I feel like the blocks are moving, and the power of taking action seems to be giving, it's some motion, some forward motion for me. So I feel really good about being here and all the humans here and what I'm learning. So I'm grateful to be here. That's me.
Well, thank you very much for waiting for me. I think I've unmuted successfully. Hello, Charles. Nice to meet you. She's gone into the big lounge room now to go and pester Daddy with her homework, which is good. I haven't done much since the last meeting. I missed yesterday's meeting, for which I apologize. It was not a meditated or even a premeditated move. I had every intention of coming to the meeting, and I was actually sitting here waiting and I felt very heavy. So it was a question of joining the meeting feeling very heavy, or do a meditation session to clear whatever was causing the heaviness. So I did a meditation session, which didn't take long, 20 minutes, half an hour, but it felt so good and calming, I didn't want to join in at that stage. So I tendered my apologies, and I'm ready to participate in unblocking whatever it is, whoever's blocked it, and maybe we should call Dino Road, I don't know. Thank you.
Okay, so just to sort of set context for folks that haven't been in one of these before, and for anybody that may tune in to screen this later, these sessions sort of came out of the idea that when people come together to converse and exchange and engage in joint endeavor and sharing, that it is not unusual in the process for the human being part of the participants to surface, sometimes in predictable ways and often in unpredictable ways, as a result of the inadvertent pushing of buttons or triggering of reactions that are usually deeper and more profound and have greater antecedent roots than just whatever the immediate conversation and exchange and trigger points were. So we put a stake in the ground on Sundays to look at that phenomena, and when that happens, when somebody's button is pushed or somebody is reactive, how does the collective, how did the people respond to that from a awareness and consciousness and sort of tacit alignment place that is human being centered first, and then whatever the thought or the intention or agenda of the conversation might be, how might we explore the sort of response to that and the framing of that. And in the current paradigm, it's not really something that's ever explicitly looked at or explored or given significance in advance. And from an awareness standpoint, it's usually just a phenomena that happens. And depending upon the nature of the people involved and the nature of the subject or the level of loadedness of whatever the trigger was, et cetera, all sorts of unforeseen, disruptive, destructive consequences or responses or reactions can happen. And how might we do that differently or relate to that differently? And so somebody came up with the meme of unblocking around that idea. And so we've explored different dimensions of elements and events that happen, triggers, and sort of the mimetic domains within which these things can be triggered. And the one today that is sort of fresh, alive, and vital for me that I'd love to put up on the boards for us to kick around is language. So I'm going to do a quick sort of me on that and then hand off. So in my belief system and frame, the first thing in human generativity and me creating the reality I create is to think it. The second thing toward making it manifest or enacting it is to express it or publish it, to put it out into the universe. So it's not knocking around in the four corners of my head. And it opens up the possibility of others receiving it, joining, elaborating, and engaging with it. And then the third is taking the actions and doing the things to make that idea happen and real. So the language part is the second step toward generative inaction or creation or manifestation. And words, I believe, are really powerful in that way. And that they have a tendency to reflect our truth and reality in a very real and immediate and compelling way. So words matter. And have more than just meaning. They, from an energy level, I think they project more than just meaning. And so to what degree is connection to word or language a basis for contention, a basis for sort of disharmony and or the blocking or the arresting of forward motion. And that's where I'll leave off, and I look forward to hearing people's thoughts around it.
I'll just throw down that I agree.
I can jump in and just what comes to mind immediately is the sending or transmitting and receiving aspects. So in, it sort of, I think about, certain people, they just don't listen, or they don't hear, or somehow it doesn't go in the way it came out or you intended. So there's all this kind of back and forth dynamics.
Thoughts and language, paramount importance. Thoughts, less so than the actual spoken word. I can walk into a bank and I can think about robbing it. I can walk out, no problems. Should I shout in the bank, I want to rob this bank? Okay. We have two spirals. There is the negative spiral and there is the positive spiral. We have two forces, so I've been told. I really haven't looked into deep physics that deeply, but I'll take it granted. And one is lesser than the other. Ladies prefer the soft-spoken, sweet, polite language. And us men in our youth, we tend to go for swearing and things. There was just as an aside, I listened to one of the female Scottish MPs. She's not bad looking, but she's getting a lot of bad mouth. And she did a good 2-3 minute talk today about how she feels she's being abused. I sympathize with her. And really, 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 I touched on this in the last meeting, in that one of the underlying rules we work under is let's be polite, let's be very nice to each other to the point of telling little white lies, sometimes even deeper. To a certain extent, I tend to agree with that, but I would also say, well, let's be honest and be extremely polite without losing our content, without upsetting people. And there lies the crux. If I upset you, even in the slightest, I've lost your attention. You will not pay any attention to me. You may never speak to me again. Such is the power of one little misdemeanor. I have tested this. And it comes down to the three-way rule. I'm not sure whether you're familiar with that or not, but I'll run through it very quickly. How do you deal with a fool? 3 ways. Don't deal with him at all. No contact. Avoid totally. Second one. Just say hello occasionally. Third one, the wise man says, keep a little dialogue going to see if you can help the poor chap, help the person in whatever way possible. And I have seen the evidence for the third one actually working. A nice little, hello, how are you? And even if you have to have the inane weather conversation or how's your day been, it's great. I think that's good for starters. Thank you.
Okay, language also includes how we present. So I was feeling, Jaswinder, that I would really feel, I would prefer to hear what you're saying as a question rather than as a statement. I find this way of teaching and talking, I feel, talking down to people is difficult. For example, when you say women prefer soft-spoken language, that may be, but it may also not be. So why not put it as a question? Do women prefer soft-spoken language? In fact, a lot of the things that we say can be couched as questions. Even what I'm saying now would probably be better as a question. Let me see if I can put it as a question. How would it be to you, Jaswinder, if you were to express what you want to say as a question rather than as a statement?
I have given that an enormous amount of thought in the past, and I put that down to the gender difference. I come from a trade and a profession that's male dominated.
Don't I know it?
And a friend of mine, a very close friend of mine, suggested a quarter of a century ago, phrase it as a question. It's not that I haven't tried it, and I came down having tried it various ways of communicating the intent accurately, that it has to be the KISS formula. Keep it short, simple, sweet, but keep it short and simple. Otherwise, I'm being stupid. Having given an instruction, do not add anything to that that might detract or instruction in any way, especially if that instruction is going to be acted on immediately. Don't draw their attention. I have done that, and once or twice I've been damaged by doing that, and never again. So yes, even when talking to the two young girls here, I tend to differ in that I use that formula and it works in that I keep the message short, I give it to them, and then I wait for action. I give way to the ladies certainly every time, because in social life and in other places, I meet with a lot of ladies and I listen to them. But I would still say that the difference comes from that generally ladies are, when they're raising children, they will ask an open-ended question to get the children to talk back rather than use a yes-no answer, which is great. Whereas I will do that when necessary with the children, but when I'm talking with adults, I expect their language capacity to be much greater and much better understanding. And Doug is superb, certainly. All yours.
I guess that's because you don't actually want anybody to respond. That's why you don't put it as a question, you put it as a statement. This is the way it is.
If I didn't want a response, I wouldn't be here.
Okay.
So I'd like to ask a question. Isn't there a difference in how you would engage if it was one-on-one conversation versus, let's say, a 5 or 6 or 10 or 20 or 50 person conversation? That's one question. It's stimulated by the fact that, one of you observed, yes, if I offend you, or if I say something that you don't understand, I will lose your attention. I will lose your interest. I will lose the connection. We'll part ways. Let's suppose, though, that we're in a conversation of 6 or 7 people, as we are now, and everything's going smoothly, and I say something that 5 people understand quite well without problem, and one of us takes offense at it. What should we do then? Where's the responsibility of the group, and what's the responsibility of the individual? What's the responsibility of the person who was offended? What's the responsibility of the person who did offend that one single individual? I have a lot of follow-up remarks, but I see hands going up, so I'll stop here.
I'm also been quite deeply of late, attending a lot of religious meetings, as you may have gathered. And in most of these places, we are very, very apologetic in the use of our words, to the extent that at the end of saying whatever we say, it's incumbent to say something like, if I've offended anybody, please forgive me. And in most contracts, at the end of the contract, if you ever read a contract, there's the end of the contract, it's errors and omissions accepted. And I tend to, and I have read a fair number of contracts, and I tend to take that when we talk to people on a one-to-one basis, or even more, that when we disengage, that if we have even inadvertently upset anybody by use of any phrase or word or anything like that, or even a gesture, that we formally just ask for forgiveness in that field, as in when we disengage, which is something very difficult for me to do, but I do tend to do that now.
Forgiven, Jaswinder. But I wanted to actually respond to Sam.
I'm sorry, I didn't get the front bit of that. I'm totally
forgiven. You asked for forgiveness and you have total forgiveness. Sam, I guess the distinction you were making in your question, as I understood it, was if there's one person out of how many others who have actually understood it, do you need to pay attention to that one person? I mean, it's a really good question. We have, or we are supposed to live in democracy, and democracy somehow is supposed to be, it's the majority who decide. We're brought up with that. But we can also see how democracy actually can take us completely away from what we really want to see happening. So I think just thinking about numbers, if one person and several others have understood, but one person somehow hasn't, I would pay attention to that one person. And I think that actually goes for us. If there's internally, that little voice is so minute sometimes, that intuitive little feeling, it's very quiet. It doesn't shout. It's not the majority, but it is the one that somehow seems to point to an important truth sometimes, which should be listened to. Yeah.
Shall I take that one again?
Actually, I note that Tammy had her hand up even before I
All
did.
right, carry on.
So I started my thing saying I agree. That was actually as a pun.
Oh,
Because that was the term that was the language challenge from 2 days ago. So I just wanted to bring people into the room on that, because I noticed my joke didn't land. And in terms of, I'm looking to get better at saying in the moment what's happening. And at Jaswinder, not to pick on you, but you would have noticed my gesture and my face palm when you said, I'll tell you what it was that triggered me. You said, the member of parliament, she was pretty good looking. You would never say that about a man. Like, there's the, I would never say, I was listening to Jaswinder when he was speaking, pretty good looking guy. And then carry on. It would just never be a thing that would feel socially acceptable. So I just want to point out there's some cultural things just around how we are as men and women, seeing as how that's part of what's on the table, where there are different standards. And thanks, Anna, for pointing that out too, because that's something that is even finer than the language is the cultural ways that we are with each other. And I think it's good to look directly at that. So I just wanted to put that on the table. And, for me, I'm looking to really be here in my physicality. So when I face palm, I want to actually express in that way so that there's a visible moment of, wait a minute. So that's mine for the moment.
I just wanted to respond to Sam's thing, and pick up with where Anna left off. I think there's the thrust for me is this idea of how do we do us differently, hopefully better, and that and I think it has to do with the value or values underlying our intention and our priority, our collective priority and orientation. And if we're human being centered first, then the sort of top, the top in my frame of orientation, the top priority is that human state of being experience in the moment, not just mine, but the collective and every individual in it. And so my orientation, Sam, to your question is a lot of the old paradigm industrial frame is majority oriented, is like if most of the people are on board, then that's good enough. But it's predicated on sort of acceptance of there being an other, and there being an other that's not happy, or there being an other that's not given full weight and load in the value setup to be incorporated, empowered, and invited from an inclusion place. And so I don't know what the answer is from a workability practical standpoint, because obviously if every single last person has to be aligned and in order and included and taken care of, is that, from the standard logical frame, is that possible, right? Like, would we get anything done? Would we be able to do anything? Because it's impossible for inclusion of everybody. But I think moving the needle from a sensitivity standpoint and from a prioritization standpoint, such that if there's one person who's been triggered in an unblocking kind of way, or has been presented with something that pushes them back or out of the field or into disconnection, that's something in conversation and connection and exchange by and between us, we want to respond to first and with priority, a la Tammy putting her hand to her head, and my knowing, but my wanting to hear, more from her about what was just the button that was just pressed. And we're the world, right, in microcosm. The six of us are the world in microcosm. So you leave one out, you leave a continent out, depending upon the scale of lens you're using. And that's sort of the extrapolated thing that I always go to. So, and I'm complete.
So I noticed Charles had his hand up, but I would also like to respond.
I have kind of two things. One is kind of a quick restatement, or what I was thinking about, Doug, also in response to Sam's kind of question about responsibility of the group. I think, it's wonderful to be here again and kind of to literally have the luxury of time and space to really explore this and to kind of be in the space and not, I'm coming in kind of without a lot of context or a whole lot of history with this group, but it seems like that's part of the intent and the actual agenda. So there's sort of a meta aspect, but depending on other contexts, and it would be a luxury to be beyond the constraints and resources, and so it just depends, sort of about urgency and agendas. I think. And then just to very quickly flag, I saw a recent article in Fast Company. Some of you might have seen, that was from the design perspective or design framework, and showing a clear relation between innovation and criticism, or self-criticism, self-reflection. So I think that's just another way to think about this kind of topic, and it's come up with me recently too, how to actually communicate, going back to the language thing. So that's all. Thanks. On to you, Sam.
So, Doug.
Sam. It's Sam.
No, I was talking to Doug, sorry. Because the little girl came in. No,
it's Sam's turn, Jaswinder. He was just past.
Sam was for Charles to finish.
Sorry, carry on. I'll wait.
Okay, so let me try and keep this brief, because I believe that there's an element that hasn't yet been mentioned, and that element is time. The question I was asking is more, when would we responsibly respond to someone who has had a misexpectation or a misunderstanding or a disappointment or an offense? And I guess, sometimes you don't find these metaphors very useful, but if the metaphor is, 6 of us were out gathering berries, and one of us finds a berry that looks like a historical event in their childhood that triggered something, there is an effect on that person, but there's also an effect on the group if that person then stops picking berries. And that particular berry shape may not affect those 5 or 6 other people who are actually picking berries. So my intent is not to disregard when someone is offended. My question is, can we take that offline? Can the mother, can the friend, can the brother, can the sister, can the father take that issue offline and deal with it adequately? Or does it require all 6 people stop their berry picking and then deal with this one particular shaped berry. And there's many implications of that. I have lots of questions based on all these points that people have brought up. But that to me is the one essential one. See, in a conversation like this, we are addressing blocks. It is 100% appropriate to bring these things up. But if we're putting together a barn, or if we're putting together a dinner, or if we're out gathering berries, or if we're out chasing a tiger, there are different constraints on the system. We are extremely privileged to be in this conversation. We are extremely luxuriant in being able to address these issues. Most people don't have time to do this. Most people have to go out and pick those berries for themselves, or put together, another dinner for their kids, or whatever.
We've heard it.
And I think that's actually quite rude. I was trying to make a point, and I feel entirely shut down now.
Well, you're making the point that Charles already made. It's as though you didn't hear the point that he was
Did you hear my
making.
point about time?
That was the point that Charles was making too.
I didn't hear
As
it.
I understood it.
See, I didn't hear it that way. I was hearing it a different way. I was hearing it as innovation and criticism.
That was one point, but he had 2 points.
Okay, so I think I'm going to drop out of this conversation now.
Okay. It's not
Personally,
my
Hold up. Let's do some meta. Let's take this up to the meta moment. Doug?
Yeah, I'd just like to take a minute to process. So, this is perfect, and why we're here. So I actually heard Charles the way Sam did, heard Sam as contributing a new point, and recognized Anna's impatience all at the same time. The question is, in the face of all of that, we're still brainstem based in terms of reactivity, sensitivity and reactivity. And the sort of meta question for me is recognizing that being in sort of awareness acceptance of that. And so it's about sort of tolerance limits or increasing tolerance. Or, can we transcend the reactivity, or from a practice standpoint, have a mechanism or a protocol to say, take a break and let the reactivity and energy of that quiet a little bit, and then check in and see where we are, and go on. And the challenge, if the reactivity and triggers roll, meaning, become sort of a catalytic reaction and a chemical reaction where one triggers two, triggers three, and you end up with sort of an increasing and cascading effect. The sort of disruption and disruption and sort of destructiveness of that to the connection and to the exchange increases. It's greater, and is there a way of stopping it or responding or establishing a mechanism to put a floor under that to sort of stop it from costing more than it has to cost? Yeah, Anna.
We did agree that we would use this. And what I see is people tend, I mean, we haven't actually used it, of course, but to use it and then for it to be disregarded seems to me, then why do we agree to use this? I heard Charles say something about urgency. And for me, that was to do with time and whether we can afford the luxury. He also used the word luxury, I think. So for me, he was making exactly the same point that Sam was making. And not that everybody has to hear everything, but if I'm pointing something out, it feels like there should be a way for Sam to stop and say, okay, give me a minute just to say something without completely collapsing.
That's the question, isn't it? So in the moment, and what is the value, what is the sort of tacit value, collective value and will from a priority standpoint within the context of each human being's experience, real-time experience in the moment as we go, right? So Sam's imperative to share through his lens whatever was operating for him is the decision or choice or intention to honor that and have that be okay, or for it not to be okay. Obviously, he experienced it's not okay for me to do that and to feel invalidated as a result. And by the way, I'm not coming from any kind of right or wrongs or judgment dimensions in any of this. I'm just looking at it as in the nature of our interactions and how we, how we work and play together, how we converse and exchange. What's the priority and what are the sensitivity settings? What's the tacit, what's the tacit understanding? Yeah, Charles.
Hi. Okay, a few things. One, it actually goes back to the first thing that I mentioned. One of the things is about the sending and receiving. So, case in point, clearly, Sam, maybe you heard me or not, or you heard me in a way and it came out another way. And so that's just what it is. It's how people are with each other and are not. Another thing is I wasn't bothered, but thank you, Anna. And anyway, and I think I'm really interested, so on the one hand, we do have this luxury and I did talk about luxury and time, and, just sort of flagging the relative urgency in a given context. That was kind of my point. But as luxurious as this sort of meta bath is, it's not unlimited, and we do have constraints. And I feel more of an urgency, let's say, to kind of keep on track with this very interesting topic of the responsibility of the group when, for example, as Sam called it, one person is offended or confused. And so I think what has just come up here that it caused us to pause and breathe is another version of that. But for me, that remains a kind of central topic of moment. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of perfect, right? And what is that there? I think I was thinking into the law of 2 feet, like, if there's that breaking point that Sam came to, and Sam and I have talked quite a bit about what interruption is, and I sense that there's a big trigger in being interrupted in terms of disrespect. Like I think for Sam, what I've perceived and seen and would inquire into confirmation of with Sam is that feels like a direct disrespect. What I notice when I'm interrupted is that my flow of thought is jangled. And what I think I noticed is that Sam's thoughts were then jangled, and he felt shut down and got angry and has left our conversation. And I was thinking about Michael Josefowicz's nemetics: notice, engage, mull, and exchange, right? And oh my gosh, I just love that human. He's just wonderful.
Can you enlarge on that? I don't know what that means.
Okay, so he and Mark Fraser and some other folks came up with this process of participating, I suppose. And first, it's to notice. So it's like he does this in-breath thing, notice, and then engage. Take a moment to engage with whatever is happening. And then that's kind of an out-breath. And then an in-breath to mull, to really deeply consider. So I loved that moment where Doug invited us to mull. He was like, okay, let's just take a moment so that what's just happened can actually land. And then the last one is, it's to express, but I don't think that's the word. Exchange is the word. So, and then there's an exchange, right? So after you've had a chance to notice, engage, so you have some information, and then you mull over that, and then you exchange. So it's this kind of cyclic learning journey in terms of anything. And so I just really loved how that's played out and is playing out right now. So that we can make these things visible. I mean, this is the thing, is we're making visible what needs to be talked about. And to Anna's point of that one quiet voice needs to be heard, right? And how we make decisions as individuals in relation to the group in terms of that is part of what we're looking to tease out. And there's a lot of like conscious choice in there, as well as unconscious activity. But I think that we're more and more moving into a place of conscious choice with that, in making these things visible and speaking directly to them. Anna?
I'm just wondering if we could have a sort of a training or a practice of talking about something and being interrupted and being able to
Well, I've thought about that, Anna. And how does it feel?
It feels okay to me. You see, I can respond to that. And that's probably why I get so impatient because it feels to me that people are repeating and repeating what they say. And I felt that Sam was repeating. He'd already said what he wanted to say, but he needed to say it again and louder and stronger. That really doesn't feel necessary to me. And I think it would be really good training to be interrupted and to learn to be able to carry on with what you want to say.
I think repetition is really a theme in here too, sort of the flip side maybe. I mean, I'm just reflecting on some other recent situations or even long time situations where I find myself repeating myself, and maybe I think I'm turning it from another angle, and it just doesn't work, but I do it, so sorry.
Hi, Harry. I actually think, Charles, that's a really big part of the deal that the old paradigm doesn't really value or allow for. And what Tammy shared about Michael's nomadics, it's an iterative process. So that's a cycle that's a constant as you progress. And we've given ourselves multiple opportunities, mostly I think at Tammy's sort of suggestion and energizing of introducing ourselves. And no two of them have been the same. And they've been iterative exercises for each person to sort of frame themselves up. And there's value in trying stuff on, and there's value evolving and developing expression. And because as the expression and the stating and the sharing of it evolves over time, I think the clarity and the sort of impression impact for people on the receiving end also evolves over time. And, I heard about Holo Chain for 3-4 years following Farananda's posts and all sorts of stuff, and never had a aha until Tammy did an interview with Arthur Brock and did what she does interpretively, popularizing what they were doing through her questioning and sharing. And it was like, holy crap, that's what they're doing. And all of the other stuff came flooding in to enrich and clarify and bring it home for me in terms of what the whole thing meant. So I wouldn't discount repetition as an important phenomenon in how we learn and connect. And I'm complete. Welcome, guys, by the way.
I guess there was a time change here in North America. I remember last fall it was different from the European time change, but we started an hour ago. Yeah, just to let you know, we've had a time fold.
I didn't see that until 5 minutes ago.
There's something I'm wanting to say about this whole thing and about how we talk, and I'm unsure about it, but I feel it's something to do with this urgency, actually, but it's a different sort of urgency. I'm feeling we really need to find a way to be able to express ourselves clearly and succinctly and in short bursts without this long, this need to take a long time to have the floor to, repeat. Harry, for example, I think says what he wants to say, and that's it. And I feel this is something that we need to learn. partly because of the urgency of the situation that we're in. We can't afford to fluff around anymore.
Then why do people do that?
Over. Sorry, Harry, what did you say?
And I wonder, why do people need to do that?
What? Sorry, Charles, I'm going to go off camera and I want you all to know that I'm still listening. And I had something else, but.
Go ahead. Oh, please, you go ahead.
It's actually gone. The spirit moved. Oh, here it is. Sorry. We need some of Harry's Dutchness. Thank you, Anna, for bringing that up. It's like, I've learned a lot from Harry in being clear and concise. And
my autocorrect wrote Duchess, but anyway, yeah, maybe that's a cultural thing actually that Tammy, that you just highlighted. And I was just simply going to say, fluffing around is actually, I think, part of how we have to, working with the language, emerging from the pre-language or the shadow realm or whatever you want to say, in order to get it out, sometimes there's quite a bunch of fluffing around. I mean, and certainly in groups, it's a whole bunch of fluffing around to get to any coherence, oftentimes. So fluffing around, I'm sorry, I don't know if I agree with the point, Anna, sorry, just to say, we can't afford, I mean, time is pressing, but what are we going to do about that? How do we avoid fluffing around?
Well, that was the question that Harry asked. Why do people do that?
Okay, since I'm in the conversation, I do a lot of fluffing around, as you might call it, internally. And I am practicing to kind of listen more than I talk. And if I talk, then try to be as concise and clear to myself firstly, and then utter it. And that's practice. And some people need to talk out loud. I talk all the time, but mostly within myself. And I like what Jordan Peter says about it. Speech is kind of the bridge between chaos and order. So we need to kind of make all this fluff into a concise pipeline, a story and some logic. So the fluffing is a very natural, multidimensional process. And I think it would depend the situation whether you bring this into the group and do it all kind of together, or sometimes you kind of want to go somewhere, but then that assumes there is a direction and an action and an intention and an agreement, and then there's no need to talk. And that's been proven scientifically as well, because they've studied communications via mail, and once people go towards a decision, the mails become shorter and the sentences become shorter, etc., etc. So it's kind of trying to, it's like, well, I'm complete.
Well, this is not about a decision or an agreement, but we do know why we're here, and it's because what Doug is saying, we want to do us better. So I'm just really bigging that up. Let's try and do it better.
There's a layer or level of there's a level or dimension to our express communication that's on an internal, tacit, emotional sensing place that's nonverbal. It's sort of subverbal, that I think goes along with speaking, with publishing, that has mixed up into it or integrated within it drivers that are more emotional than cognitive. Things like being heard, feeling either validated or of value. And our model currently is to place all of the focus and energy and attention on this, what's spoken, the verbal, as reflected in words. Circling back to language and words as the source of blocks, or as the triggers. So, there are the words, there's the lack of or consensus of understanding of what the words being used mean, right? As a cognitive open question that isn't 100% assured at any given point in time. And then there's this whole emotional subtext of, within the context of me relative to all of you and vice versa, am I being heard? Is what I'm sharing being accepted? Is it being valued and respected? Is it being acknowledged? And that dimension of conversation and communication isn't really given its due in terms of how significant a part of the share exchange landscape it is. But it's operating all the time in terms of the being behind the statement or the expression or the contribution. And I wonder whether that dimension is as much part of the language being trigger phenomena as the words and meanings themselves.
I think you're absolutely right. I think that it's that aspect which triggers just as much or more than the misunderstandings of actual meanings. But I don't know how we deal, how we respond to those aspects.
Does this mean that the meaning is always determined by the being and recreated by the being? And that the being is all we can control, and the being we create the meaning? Is that related to this?
No, sorry, Tammy, you go.
Well, just to bring Harry and Glenn up to speed, we were having a dialogue about how, and Sam's core question was, how do we deal in a group when one person is not being heard, or there's challenge that emerges, and then Anna interrupted Sam, and Sam failed. So Sam's listening, but is not feeling heard, and has had an experience of, okay, well, I don't feel comfortable being part of this conversation. So I just want to lay that out, that that's part of what's happened here. And so we're having a live learning experience of what it is to not be heard, and how we will deal with that as a group. Charles.
Just to fill in slightly more, because it was a kind of fascinating meta moment, or a few piling up, where what Anna was interrupting Sam to tell him that he hadn't heard me say just prior some of the things that Sam was effectively repeating, using some of the same words and ideas. And so it was sort of, but actually the kind of topic about not being heard or being offended or confused, which was a couple other aspects of what happened toward the beginning of the call, it came out in another way, kind of spontaneously. So just to highlight that.
I just want to correct the fact I didn't actually interrupt Sam. I made the gesture that we have agreed, and I made it 3 times with gaps in between to say, I've heard what you've said. It's repeating the same thing. This is the gesture that we've agreed, right? And I did that with Sam, and finally he gave in and said, okay, I'm not part of this conversation anymore, because he felt like I was interrupting him.
Could I try and summarize what I think is the topic? I think there's a tension in the group about being heard. Is that it? Or do I miss something?
Say that again.
I think there's a tension, that's the topic. There are tensions with some individuals and also in the group then as a topic about being heard.
Well, if I could just try and clarify what Doug was saying, he was pointing out a distinction between the sort of hang-ups that we come across when we feel that we're not being heard, or we're not given the space, or we're not validated. And the difference between that and the misunderstandings about meanings of language, because actually this whole session started off with Doug saying, let's talk about language. And this is what has arisen in our discussion about language. So Doug was just pointing out these 2 different ways of getting misunderstandings.
And so something that just came up for me, if from a practice standpoint, we had full sort of mindfulness and awareness and recognition of human signaling, experiential signaling, then when Sam went into his share and was sort of retracking over things that Charles had said, if we were set up to recognize that as being either driven or motivated by something else coming up for him, right? If we recognize that as a experiential and being communication based on the communication choice he made, right? There would have been a mechanism and means to go into inquiry with him to say, Sam, just curious, checking in. You sort of framed what Charles had framed already, but you obviously felt the need and imperative to share that. What's underlying that, or what's driving that in terms of what's the concern or the element. So coming from, and Anna, and I'm just looping back around, this is very pneumatic, like Michael would be very proud. But your share with Jaswinder about converting to inquiry, saying, okay, what I'm getting, I've gotten already. So there's something else going on underlying that Sam felt the need to communicate. What's that? Might have been a sort of a practice orientation that recognized there was more value meaning not being expressed in a way that we understood for him in terms of whatever the driver, the imperative, or the feeling was. I just throw that out for consideration.
And weaving back to the language, in inquiry, I think there is this part, and maybe that is the mull of what it is to recapitulate it in your own language is a part of what's going on here, because, you know, part of it is perhaps that Sam has his own language to be able to express and experience that. And that's part of what we're talking about too, is that we do have different languages that we use to express things, and sharing that language is a part of it. Feels like it's backing up the truck and going over it again, but it is, I think it's a mulling, it's a chewing of it so that it's truly landed and understood for everyone, because we do have different languages that we use and different ways of knowing. Anna?
That would be very different, I think, if Sam had said, I heard what Charles said, but I'd like to put it in my own language. I felt he completely disregarded what Charles said, and I felt that was disrespectful as well.
I'll just jump in and say, in the interest of time, in this moment, and also back in the moment when it came up, I wasn't bothered, and I just felt like it was better just to keep the flow. But I'm glad this all is coming out. Just to say, that was how I experienced it at the time. I'm good.
Can I just?
Sorry, I was going to jump in there without raising my hand.
I was just going to ask a little question.
Okay. Hello, Glenn. Nice to meet you. Carry on.
Yeah, nice to meet you too. Yeah, I'm just trying to sum up what I've heard so far. There was suggested a theme of language, and what came up was this experience of not being heard or being misunderstood.
That was the exact point. If you are at a meeting and there are several people listening and you are the speaker, for argument's sake, and one of those persons, like me, who's been interrupted constantly during this meeting, misses out on what's happening, what would you do about that? Now, there are a lot of parameters around that, so I'll leave it there. Carry on.
Yeah, I also, of course, missed out on the first hour, so I don't know what you talk about here, and at the same time, it's interesting, I guess, to come in the middle of it, and but it's just quite interesting that before today I had a thought related to the unblocking theme, which I wanted to mention, and it seems to me it's quite relevant to this, and it seems it's also connected to what Sam calls the smart people problem, and it's connected to differences of meaning, because we've uncovered that we have different associations to the same words because we have different experiences, and sometimes we don't know what the experience of the other people are. Generally we don't, so there's misunderstandings, and we have to clear that up along the way, and that in itself is a process of learning which seems inevitable. We'll have to dig a little into that stuff time and time again. But I saw one sort of elephant in the room which hasn't been mentioned maybe enough, or I feel that it's an important thing in this, and that is to do with being overwhelmed by ideas and thoughts and information and expectations, and just how much we think about, we want to do, how much we read, and this constant flow of information and the demands of life and the limitations of time and attention, because that's, for me, the primary thing to prevent me from really listening to all of you is really, it feels like it's really energy available energy there and then, or sometimes there's other thoughts or interests or distractions. Sometimes something comes to me, oh, I really want to make this point, it would be great to interject this. So there's so much happening, and that's a sort of bandwidth issue, you could say. And there might be the best intentions in the world, and often I seem to see very good intentions, but it's sometimes we fall a little out of it. But I wanted to say one thing more, and then I'll finish. I try during these conversations to listen to people, and when they talk, and sometimes I guess I manage it more than other times. I don't even know if I managed it well enough or what that even means. But what I've noticed is that when I try to listen with interest, generally I feel that there is so much wisdom which comes out. It feels like they get it. And yeah, they're talking about the same thing as me in a somewhat different way, but they get the essentials. And that's a peculiar experience, and I've had that many times, especially in these talks when I've tried to really listen. It's like I hear the truth coming out in a way, and through a subjective expression, of course, because we all see it from different points of view, but it's all true that what we say expresses how we feel about it at that moment. So it's our truth which is being expressed, and that's interesting. I don't know what to conclude from that, but that is interesting. So I certainly very much agree with you, Anna. You need to be short and succinct. I probably haven't done that well, but okay. I'll try to do that the next time, really, because I think that's really important. And that's something that I need to train my ability to do, and maybe that's a part of the reason I'm here. Yeah.
I just wanted to kind of calibrate one sort of detail or point in regard to what happened earlier in the call, toward the beginning of the call, in terms of and how it came up about talking around being unheard, or feeling unheard, being unheard. I think again, what also happened was the idea or the issue or the question about being offended and also being confused. And then in sort of sketching my note to remember this, I wrote it that way, what I just said, sort of in the passive voice, like feeling unheard, feeling offended, and so forth, but then flipping it around into active, also the not hearing or the offending or the confusing. So I just wanted to throw that in there.
So, sorry for not raising my hand. Here we are. My 2 cents worth for what it's worth. We come down to, as far as I can make out, there's a slight difference of how we misconstrued prioritization, whereas one person seems to think that the word urgent or urgency means time, and another person doesn't. It's not the first time that sort of things happen. It's not going to be the last time. That still does not answer our primary question here, which is, I've missed out on a lot of this meeting. What are we going to do about it? Shall I catch up later? If we're in a big meeting and we have a lot of people, but somebody in the audience, in this case it could have been Sam, it's important to keep him up to speed, but for some reason he couldn't be kept up to speed. What do we do about it? We take him aside, all of us, and bring him up to speed, or leave it to one of us? What is the priority there? Should the wedding go ahead without Sam, or he can't because he's the groom? Nothing much more to add, really. Thank you.
I think what you're raising is an essential. It's an essential question. If our collective salvation means everybody, it's all of us or none of us, how do we address, how do we support, how do we include those that are in or and out and in and out or out completely by circumstance or whatever? And Sam actually raised that question, and I wanted to share something about that. I'm sorry that he blinked out, but one of the things I wanted to share was an experience I had with another group in the G+ world, and where there were folks that sort of came in with a little less, awareness and understanding of protocol and communication dynamic and all of the rest. And in that case, the community had grown and was big enough that there were enough people for whom their gifts and talents were in reaching out and connecting with those folks and helping to sort of bring them in and bring them along, onboard them and learn them up and listen to them and establish connection and harmonization. And the person who had founded and was running the group had sort of a Teutonic, well, they're out. And I found myself reaching out to some of the folks who had been sort of canned to connect with them and to engage in dialogue and whatever. And over time, they would find their way back in, but in a different frame. And 9 out of 10 of those times, it was just about listening and hearing them and giving them an opportunity to connect and then to share as requested or interested. And I think accepting responsibility for that or incorporating responsibility for that as an awareness and a protocol is important. And just as a sidebar, I did go into IM and I did ping Sam directly, and I reached out and said, by the way, it would be really valuable if you could see your way to rejoining if you were so moved. So I mean, I think it is a thing. Hello. Welcome. It is a thing. It is a thing to prioritize, to make that a priority. And I thank you for raising that, because I think it goes to the heart of being human first.
Thank you for rejoining us, Sam. Much glad to see you. Maybe perhaps I should be the first one to. Do you have anything to say? Would you like to vent out any particular feelings that you might have that you haven't been heard? We're all agog and listening. Carry on.
Actually, not at this point. I have to admit, I'm listening this entire time with a little bit of amusement. Over.
It's always amusing these talks too. So a lot of ways to see it.
I just want to notice the enormous change that is happening as soon as Sam reappeared, kind of relief in the group. It's nice to see. And we all knew he wouldn't quit.
All right. I'll say a few things. Okay. Yes, there is an immense amount of information overload in these things. And if I actually did not hear Charles, I apologize, because Charles and I both raised our hands in response to something else. And I did hear part of what Charles was saying. I probably didn't hear the first part, okay? Maybe that unique experience is just mine, but I'll just have to own that one. It is the case that what I was trying to do was connect that thought to something else, but I didn't get the opportunity. And even though it has been raised that this is a possible practice, it wasn't necessarily mandatory, as far as I heard, that as soon as someone did this, that the other person actually shut up right away. So there may be some agreements, and I'll use that word right now intentionally, we may want to arrive at that says, well, if a person does it 2 or 3 times, maybe you should really acknowledge that and say something. Or if 2 people do it, then shut up right away and, give way to the floor, okay? There are many times that I find myself hearing someone say something that I think I've pretty much heard them say N times before, but out of curiosity and generosity, I'm wondering what the new nuance is that they're bringing this time. So yes, I also wanted to at least assure most of you that I didn't really take this very severely. I kind of thought it was a good way to illustrate the point that was being asked earlier. But let me just be very authentic and candid. I felt that this has also happened to me multiple times, and in particular by you, Anna. But probably now it's been 3, 4, or 5 times where you've actually assumed you understood what I was saying, you interrupted me, and you sort of, wanted me to do something else. Now, if that were part of an agreed upon set of practices, no issue, none whatsoever. But we haven't had those practices. So I, in my own authentic way of trying to express what I think is valuable, was trying to actually offer something new. I usually have this generosity with pretty much everybody in the group. I didn't feel that generosity was extended to me in the moment. Anna, over.
So is repetition a problem? Seems that we'll have to repeat some things, the basics, maybe short, to bring something new. Sometimes I come back and I repeat myself, but I try to find something basic, something true, and then to add something that moves it forward to a better understanding or a better situation. But this came up yesterday when Neil challenged us to come back to certain questions like, why are we here? What are we doing? What is the larger context? And to come back to this repeatedly, maybe with certain intervals. And that is a kind of repetition, but it's a repetition which goes to the basics of why I'm here. So it's always new. Yeah, but then how do we know, right? Yeah, Anna.
Well, I just want to respond to Sam because I want to go back to one of the sessions that we had. I guess it was Thursday when this guy, Klaus, joined us. And I was very deeply affected by what Klaus said. I've done my best to circulate the ideas that he was talking about. They certainly made me feel that this is something, there's something that we need to be getting on with. So it could be, I'm just sort of putting these things together. And you probably heard me say, Sam, when you were listening, that I do feel this urgency, this need for us to really get our act together somehow, learn how to talk with each other in as concise and effective a way as possible. And it might be something to do with hearing what he said, the ideas that he was putting forward, that it felt like there was something real actually going on. Which made me feel hopeful that there is change possible. I think for quite a while I've been feeling it's unlikely, and maybe feeling a bit more stuck. So I don't know whether that helps to understand why I might have been more more impatient and more, well, you seem to see me as impatient all the time and interrupting all the time. I don't think that's true, actually, but I do think that this time I probably was more more willing to put myself out there and say, come on, let's, you know, there's something that is happening for me that I'm feeling, and maybe, you know, that was expressed in what I was doing. And I also want to apologize if that was something which was hurtful to you.
Thank you, Anna. Yes, I think I do have an issue. I do have a trigger around being interrupted and that connoting lack of respect. I didn't actually, until I joined GCC, I didn't think that was an issue I shared just by myself, you know? In most groups I've been in, one of the rules has been, don't interrupt others, you know, unless they've just droned on and on and on and on. But well, anyway, so it's up to you whether or not I droned on and on that time. But let me also say one more thing, Anna. What the impatience is that you're feeling from Thursday's conversation is probably one that I let show 3 or 4 months ago in myself. I felt that these conversations weren't, in a quote, double quote, air quote, producing enough. There wasn't something for new people like Charles to see and say, wow, these people have really done something in the 5 months that they've been together. There wasn't something for Neil to say, well, geez, these people really heard me and are incorporating my thoughts into what they're doing. There wasn't something for all these 240 people in Facebook to say, wow, there's a website and it's, you know, got some charters and it's got some protocols and it's got a whole set of accomplishments there, you know? So there was an impatience that I felt at that time. And when I expressed that impatience, I got a lot of pushback at that time. So I decided to mellow out. But that doesn't mean that I do different. I'm taking that impatience and going elsewhere with it. I'm writing how-tos. I'm putting together websites. I'm connecting with other people. This is not the only forum. So this forum is a way for us to, you know, discuss what is it that triggers me, triggers others. I'm very happy to be the guinea pig. You know, I am not perfect. I've got triggers. And I want to have those triggers show up because I'd rather be the guinea pig rather than somebody else coming in and then, you know, be put on the spot. I've been put on the spot many times and I don't have any issue with that. I think feeling uncomfortable is a key part of how we grow and how we actually learn how to be with each other and how we learn. Over.
I just want to interject that there are lots of ways of contributing to the cure that our world needs. And there are lots of initiatives in lots of places that are very concrete, tangible, rubber meets the road, like Classes Work in Food and folks with on the ground projects and all sorts of arenas. And I think our barn raising stake in the ground was with a mind and an eye toward building something concrete in terms of the platform, that we need that doesn't exist. But reintroducing the human beings behind all of those initiatives and refocusing and shifting to effectiveness of sharing, communication, conversation, exchange, collaboration, in how we do that from an awareness standpoint, from a practices standpoint, from a making conscious, making explicit, and making bringing to sort of full top of mind awareness in service to us doing that better, and doing that better in all of those other applied contexts and situations, I think is absolutely a value and important contribution to bring to the world at large. Even though the outputs aren't, tangible and itemizable and postable on a website in terms of look at what I did, look at what we created, look what we've accomplished as reflected in artifacts. Our artifacts that I would assert and argue are, with full credit and attribution to Tammy, is the body of work that's been captured in these conversations and recordings, which is a massive and rich resource and archive that hasn't even begun to be harvested, tapped, and examined and used in service to reflecting what our actual contribution to the world is. And so I want to sort of confess something around that. So Fabian and I are working on a paper for a peer-reviewed journal around our work. One of the things that these conversations have meant for me is attempting to model and be a catalyst in the way that we envision that role and what that means in helping and engaging with people that want to work together and collaborate together. And we were talking about ways of harvesting data and insight out of the historic archive of videos that have been created as one dimension of this paper that we're working on. And it's not formed yet, so I hadn't come to you guys to say, this is what I'd like to explore and do. Would you be okay with it in terms of a first harvest in tangible, quantified terms from the body of work we've generated together? But there is a vision for doing that in terms of mapping the arc of our conversations, the proliferation of the number of sessions we have, the number of people that have participated in those conversations, the number of threads that have been generated off the back of the posting of those conversations, just on like a superficial quantification, like measurement level of increased energy, investment of time and attention, and engagement as a generative process, just us talking. And it's significant. I don't know whether any of you have sat down, but I did some thumbnail totaling, and I was like, holy crap, you know, how many hours and the rate hours and how many, all of that. So I just wanted to share that because this ain't chopped liver. This isn't nothing or meaningless because we don't have things to point to in the productive frame. And I'm complete.
I would introduce an idea, just very briefly, that the artifacts we're producing are different versions of us. If we can be different because of these conversations, those are real artifacts that then have power in the world because we engage every other activity possibly a little bit differently based on what we're doing here. That, I think, is one very powerful artifact. That's the community of impact idea that I think I would like to be able to see. And yes, that's branded, but you know, we've introduced that term before. Over.
I just want to point out that I've been channeling Sam, and these videos here are one piece, but Sam's also been doing the chronologue. Doug, you jump in and do that sometimes too. Glenn has said that he's stoked to write up a little thing after our sessions, all different ways of presenting our present moment. And when Sam dropped off, you know, I was like, oh shit, there's only like 3 chats in the chronologue. And then I thought I would test it because I personally way more, I love what it is to just look at you all and be able to really experience it. But I thought, okay, well, maybe I'll try and see what it is to actually try and type out what people are saying just so I can have a different experience. And so, yes, there's the richness of what we're creating in present time, but then there's also the metrics of, you know, the different pieces that go into what you were just saying, Doug, in terms of, you know, how many people have watched the video, how many people got in touch with a person. Like there's different metrics of value that emerge from this present moment. And we all interact with them differently. So I found, interestingly, that I was able to actually type pretty much what people are saying and kind of get it in real time. And so anyhow, I'm having a new experience over here. And thanks for everybody, because I wouldn't do it if Sam hadn't done it. But it is a value and it creates an artifact that can also be extrapolated to other contexts. That's what I got.
I have a little question for the room. I just wanted to check. Yeah, okay. This is a short question. But am I hearing here that there's a wish in the whole room for continuing the work on the artifacts and the way we are, which makes the artifacts, and to renew this and really explore it and go into it and try stuff? That's what I hear in the room.
I think Jaswinder had his hand up and then Charles, right?
Oh, go ahead. Sure, go ahead.
Mine isn't so important. Carry on, Charles.
Oh, okay. Well, I let's see. Now I think I lost it for a second. Oh, just to say, I'm as hi, by the way, to those of you I haven't met before, and glad to be here. So I'm new to a lot of this, appreciating very much, Doug, the importance and the sort of literally, in a way, giant weight of all this artifacts and videos, and I mean, incredible body of work that you know, you guys have impressed me in a number of ways. Also, just the consistency, the kind of really ongoing aspect, and building, and probably exponential, I suppose, growth in some ways. And and I was just kind of reflecting on that and agreeing, you know, or saying, yes, I'm in, or I'm interested. I see the value. And then I started thinking about, well, you know, kind of to skip ahead, like, what are some technical approaches that you guys probably have thought about or even discussed, like sort of dealing with, you know, filtering AI, you know, whatever tools might be handy to, if not just automate, you know, actually just support and augment that whole approach, you know, so going below this quantifiable surface that you referred to. I'm just interested, so thanks.
Let me just respond real quickly to you, Charles. For the last 2 or 3 months, after each video is posted, probably about 4 or 5 hours afterward, I usually take the YouTube produced automatic transcript, put it in a Google Doc, and I link that as the first comment in the YouTube and also to the posted video in Facebook. So it does make possible that someone could search for a word, assuming Google did a good job, like, you know, trigger, right? Someone could actually look for the word trigger and see whether or not it happened within the transcript, and then jump immediately to that time tag instance, because every 3 or 4 seconds, a time tag is introduced into that automatic transcript. So you can actually get pretty close to the actual part of the video that contains that particular conversation. Okay, just wanted to say. The other thing I'll say, this is idea number 2, is we make these videos more valuable if we actually create derivative works from them. If we actually are pointing to relevant sections, like, you know, my meltdown, for example, and say, okay, at minute blah, 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 here's where you can go see Sam Meltdown, okay? I'll probably get 200 hits on that one this week, okay? And otherwise, you know, we can then take those derivative works and say, okay, here's a blog I'm gonna write on it. You know, Tammy's gonna write a Medium article on it. Glenn's gonna write up a summary of it. You know, Doug's gonna include it in his coaching work. You know, I'm gonna actually, you know, link it to my next meltdown. Who knows, right? So those are ways to maximize the value we're getting out of these videos. To leave them just as videos, to me, yes, it's valuable, but there's much more potential there that I think could be done if we actually then are able to leverage these further. Over.
Yes, as well as putting the names of the people to tie that to. It's also close.
And I'm sort of down the road of advanced text recognition and analysis and sentiment analysis, word frequency analysis of the transcripts of the videos.
I'm sorry, Doug. I'm sorry to interrupt, but if Sam's going off, Sam, are you still there? And can you pass me hostability so that I can end this recording and we don't have to chop off 7 hours while you go for lunch? Okay, wicked. Thank you. Sorry, Doug. And thanks for that.
That's okay. So there's a whole bunch of automation analytics that I envision in the long of this, that's about providing automatic tagging, contextualization on a sense-making, meaning extraction basis that would enable all of the videos and the content of the videos and the people who are in the videos to have a automated contextualized signaling mechanism. So when Glenn and I are having a conversation 6 months from now about a particular piece of the elephant, the system goes, you know, you have these dozen conversations that use those same words in that same context previously. Would you like to reference those? Here are the links. I mean, that's the vision I'm carrying in terms of where this goes.
I just say bravo. It's beautiful. I love it.
Yeah, I love that too. But we've talked about that before, of course. So we just have to begin somewhere. Yeah.
I fear this meeting is going to end soon, so I'd like to propose a little question to the group, because the person concerned, all of you know that person much better than I do. At one of our previous meetings, I did quite a long chat when I think we had barnstorming, or it was and it was unbarnstorming, where I talked about introduce myself to the group. Alex Reed has watched or not watched, but he has taken a little bit of an offense at what I had to say. We had a small exchange whereby I invited him to have a chat with me on the phone. I actually rang him via messenger phone twice and he declined. He then said he's not good at talking because he has a bad memory. And then I invited him to chat by other means, and the written word wasn't good for me because I have a bad shoulder. I broke the shoulder some time ago, and it hurts if I do too much typing. To cut it short, I have invited him. I'm open for chatting. He is not, and I would really like to get to know him. How do I go about that? I don't want the answer now. I'm quite willing to have a one-to-one with anybody and everybody at whenever convenient to see how I can progress further. If you could perhaps have a chat with him as you know him better, and make some interconnection between us, that would probably be to facilitate a chat. That would be excellent too. Thank you. I look forward to your participation.
I just want to share. I have no idea why or how in the flood tide of stuff crossing my eyeballs, but I followed that exchange, believe it or not, with high interest. And also look at it as not a resistance on either of your parts, but a very clear expression by each of you what your own unique subjective constraints were in terms of modality of interaction and exchange. And figuring out how to solve that each for the other, I believe should be a platform affordance that doesn't place the burden on you to meet him where he lives or him to meet you where you live, but that enables both of you to talk to each other even if there doesn't appear to be a bridge or mechanism to do it in a way that both of you can. It's a perfect example of the world, though, and the challenge, because we have to relate to participants where they live and what their circumstances and what they can and can't use, what doesn't work for them, and on a comprehensive basis. So I thank you for raising it. I don't have an answer, but it caught my attention, and it's like, that's the question of the hour. Like, how do we solve that for both of you? And I think it's part of our requirements.
I have a kind of tag on, which maybe could be useful lens. It's something that I've been thinking about quite a bit recently in a few other contexts, and it's a concept which is apparently going back to kind of Taoist thinking contained in the I Ching around this idea of coming to meet halfway. And not that I can explain it any more than it sounds. I found this in a book by a woman named Carol Anthony, whom some of you may know, and she has a version of the I Ching. And this is a book that I have here. It's called Love and Inner Connection. And it basically is around love, kind of looking through the I Ching lens. And so obviously, the context is quite different, but maybe has some overlap with what I've been thinking about broadly as collaboration, which has to be based first on communication. So coming back to the question, and I've been dealing with this, for example, just to be momentarily personal, going through a divorce. So talking to the ex, literally, like, where's the communication, and can we actually collaborate into this divorce? But anyway, if someone doesn't want to talk, if they literally don't want to meet you halfway, even just to have a conversation, I've been really puzzling over this. I'm involved in this quite large initiative, Climate Change and Consciousness, which some of you might have heard about. It's a conference and it's a bunch of other things which relate, I think, very much to this GCC gathering. which is one of the reasons I'm here, but just to say there's a few people in our so-called team, which is not yet a team, but a group of people who showed up and stuck around so far. And a couple of those don't want to talk about certain things, and they're very clear with their boundaries. Okay, so it's coming out in another way. So just to flash on, I'm kind of seeing how can I transpose this concept of coming to meet halfway into any situation of communication and collaboration. I'm not sure.
I feel like it's in asking a question that really helps, right? In that moment, if we can, I appreciate what Anna does too, in terms of like putting the hand up and saying, hold up, you know, like, and how can we bounce into that meta conversation of, are we on track? And have we made an agreement of this? Or, you know, that voice that needs to be heard. But I feel the transition in terms of making it relevant to the group gets crystallized and asking a question. And is powerful. It's a powerful tool.
Yes, okay. I'm not going to take this personally, but I have said this earlier, but that I have tried that methodology. And in this conversation, again, I can see that there are gender differences which can lead to a little bit of a fark, a little bit of a difference, and that can escalate quite quickly. I'm quite willing to give it another go. I will ask questions, open-ended questions, if that pleases you, and see how far that takes us. I'm not going to elaborate on that. We'll see how that one goes. But this thing with Mr. Reed still stands. I really would like to resolve that ASAP. Thank you.
So we're at a good solid 2 hours plus, and I think it's I'd love to do a wrap up. So if we could do a brief harvest, if anyone or each of us wants to share their sort of feeling and takeaway, and we'll wrap it up and get back to Sunday.
Well, okay, I'm going to do a very quick thank you very much. It's been most illuminating and, if not somewhat entertaining. I look forward to the next one. Thank you.
I love how we're getting closer to the moment in terms of responding to things as they come up. I've noticed that I've been being pushed into that, and it's not comfortable, being honest about what's arising in the self and putting the hand up and saying it. But I'm getting better at it, and I appreciate that today was like we did it all in a stack, and we can all learn from this. How can we be more real? How can we just show up as we are? How can we allow what is emerging to be something that we learn from and see together and hold? I think we've demonstrated that today. And I think this is a really great one to rewatch, to take that second stage of learning. And I'm curious as to how this has landed on other people to really feel the weaving of what we've all experienced. So.
I would basically agree and say I had a, well, definitely positive experience, and it was quite rich, and it feels whole in a way, or approaching wholeness in terms of the lessons, or let's say learnings that if they're takeaways, then they're lessons. I don't know. Anyway, I'm just glad to know and to meet all of you, and hope to participate more. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone, for being here and showing up and being yourselves. And hope to see you again soon.
This is Friday, Saturday, Sunday, seeing some of you. So it's become like kind of tribe or a family or what. So that works in me. I go to bed and I dream about you guys, and I keep talking to you. And I go up in the morning and try pondering and mulling, and it's a new word for me, mulling on everything I heard. And it's extremely interesting. And I open my Facebook because I need to know. I look at Facebook, and then I stumble into the global collaboration group page, and then there's another page about conversation. And I have basically spent most of my day trying to get some messages out of this huge information overload. And I love it. And I think I agree with that. We're exploring unknown territory. And so there is no map, there is no structure, there's nothing. And I learned about patterns today, a little more about patterns, because I followed patterns like decades. And we just kind of iterating towards some understanding about this complexity. So this is what we are doing. So I think also taking into account what Neil shared about, I've been here, it's like you're going in circles. Yes, we are exploring. So, and I couldn't word that yesterday, but now after one night sleeping and dreaming, okay, that's what we're doing. It's totally on track. And I watched Model Free Patterns or something like that by Monica Anderson, a video. And it's great because she basically words what we are doing. The difference between we have this rationality and we know how it works, so we apply it to this new situation. That doesn't work. It's the old system. So I'm totally without hands and understanding, and now kind of poking around, and we're learning. We're learning quite a lot. And that's my experience for today as well. So thank you.
Yeah. I also feel that every process, it's all very interesting. We're on the right track. All of that. I also feel a little bit of a push inside, little impatiency, sort of a wish to move it to the next level, progress it, and I wonder what my role can be here, what I can contribute with at this point of the process. And it's a part of me that wants to be a bit of a challenger in the sense of trying to move it forward, which is a way for me to challenge myself as well, because I have, just as big problems with that as anyone. I feel that's needed. So at the moment, I want to, continue showing up. It's great. And, but also to explore more, play more, and try to go into new territory. Yeah. And there's a lot of things which would be great to try. Dig deeper. Yes, the last thing, this is important to just include in that, to play and go into new territory around the basics, the real important basics, and come back to those again and again. And that's what I feel now is the direction that feels most relevant. The basic questions: why are we here? I want to help something good for the whole world, the human family, the people. That's what I care about. Trying to contribute something good, and then making the artifact, trying to present it in new ways, short ways, better ways, all of it. So yeah, going into it. I'm good for today. Thank you all. You're great, amazing beings.
Just as a question aside, I do apologize for speaking out of turn. Sorry, Anna, can I just have 10 seconds. How many of us here in the last 5 years yearned for this sort of company? Thank you.
Sam?
Jaswinder, I've actually been a part of a conversation series every Wednesday night in Palo Alto since 2011 February that covers much of the same ground. So I know there are many such groups like this. But thanks, Tammy, for inviting me to do a checkout, because I wanted to ask a question that links back to the first opening question that I had. I think the conversation that I was a part of for today was definitely appropriate for an unblocking. Imagine, though, that we had a barn raising or a Focus Friday conversation where we're really trying to get, let's say, the deep in the guts of, let's say, Charles's work or Jaswinder's work. And all of a sudden I get triggered, okay? And then it takes an hour and a half, for me to rejoin or, for me to feel comfortable or whatever. What does that do to the focus of the actual conversation in a barn raising or in a Focus Friday? I'm just kind of curious for us to consider that.
I was going to jump in there as I normally do with both feet. No, I think I'll hold back on that one some other time. I'll let somebody else take that. Thank you.
By the way, that was a checkout question. I know we're checking out, so I wasn't necessarily trying to reintroduce the new topic. I was just going to connect it back to the reason I asked the question in the first place.
So, and I think to bring it full circle, that's why Sunday. Because it costs what it costs, it is what it is, and it is actually at the belly of the challenge beast for how we as human beings do us differently. It's rarely about the subject matter or the undertaking. It's almost all the time about the human beings behind that, to me. And I'm just really appreciative of all of you showing up and co-creating this. And this was a biggie, and it didn't fail to fulfill in terms of the level of richness and satisfaction that it produced for me. And Charles, I want to acknowledge you and thank you for showing up and for contributing. And it's great to have you in this thread. And just another side acknowledgement, Anna. Wow. I just want to acknowledge you for stepping up as big as you did in the way you did, not necessarily its adverse effect on Sam, but just you getting that big, which I think is part of what it's about for all of us, is to play big. And some of that involves taking chances and being risky. And I think if we do it from heart and we do it from the right place, that it's in service to all of us to do that. So I want to acknowledge for coming back, because it's of the essence when buttons are pushed and when stuff does happen that you never go to bed angry, right? That's the rule. Never go to bed angry. So having the circle back together was really critical and important. And so that's a gift and consideration that you gave by coming back, and I appreciate that. And with that, I think I'm complete and we're complete. So go enjoy your Sunday.